Bringing back a guest, or we're bringing a guest, Daniel Croxall, who is the Assistant Professor of Lawyering Skills
That's right.
at the University of the Pacific, and also the General Counsel for El Segundo.
That's correct.
Welcome to the live stream.
Thank you for having me. I'm stoked.
Now, I'm told your brother started El Segundo Brewing.
That's right. Yeah.
And he just turned to you and he said, listen, I'm going to need a lawyer,
Right.
so help me with this.
Yeah. So I was a litigator at the world's largest law firm doing litigation crap, and my brother called me and said, I'm opening a brewery. It's a regulatory nightmare. Can you help me? And I did, and got him open, and I started getting calls from his friends and from his associates, and I ended up leaving that job and opening my own firm representing craft breweries, and then this teaching job opened up, and that's where I'm at.
So now are you still representing other breweries as well?
Not right now. I only represent El Segundo Brewing Company,
Okay.
and the rest of that is a full-time teaching gig.
Now, in terms of what you have to solve on the legal front for El Segundo and what you were doing for other breweries, what do you think is sort of the most difficult thing that breweries encounter? Is it the red tape when they're getting started?
Right.
Is it protecting their IP?
Right.
What is it?
Well, you have some insight because it's both of those things. The initial process of getting open is pretty much a red tape nightmare, and you got to know what you're doing in terms of dealing with local agencies, the ABC, the TTB, and once they get open and going, it's kind of like, can we do this? No or yes. Can we do that? No or yes. And after that, once it becomes like a grown-up company, you have to start worrying about IP. You have to start worrying about trademarks and that kind of thing. So it kind of keeps you pretty busy. I mean, if as a full-time lawyer, if you had maybe 5 brewery clients, you'd probably be pretty busy.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So what types of things do you encounter on a day-to-day basis with El Segundo?
A lot of times, a lot of it comes down to marketing and branding, and it'll be like, hey, I kind of want to do this spin on this theme, and I'll be like, no, that's a risk right there, for you're going to get a cease and desist. Or I'll be like, yeah, I think that one's far enough, or we could say it's a parody. But a lot what's happening right now is you've probably seen like In and Stout and certain IP type things going on in the media. I try to steer my clients away from that. I just don't even want to deal with lawyers. Like I joke with my clients that I'm like one of the few lawyers I know that I like. So I don't want them to have to pay me to deal with other lawyers. So
Yeah, I did see that In and Stout, and it does seem like there is at least some thinking around, hey, we should use a cease and desist as a media tool.
Yeah.
Is that real? Like,
Yeah.
do people actually think that way, and like why?
I think there's some, and I think the exposure and the risk is if you do a one-off and somebody sends you a cease and desist, it's going to hit the media, the social media, and all that, and it's some free exposure. I think if you're dealing with some of the big boys, like maybe a sports agency, MLB, NFL, Sony, things like that, they're a little more serious about their IP, and they might be really hard on you. I think Budweiser or AB InBev did a really good job with that dilly-dilly thing to show people that, hey, we're friendly, we're not trying to sue anybody. But at the end of the day, you have to pay lawyers to deal with that crap, and craft breweries can't afford that.
Yeah.
And so my job, and the way I see it, I'm very conservative, is let's just not take the risk. Let's just go with our own branding that has nothing to do with IP.
That's
and
smart.
just create our own brands.
Now, if somebody is threatening a lawsuit, what's like the first piece of advice you would give to a brewery when they receive that first email that's like, everything in this email is confidential, I'm going to sue you if you go public with it, etc.?
That's a really good question. So I think my inclination is, let me just pick up the phone. If we're dealing in the craft beer industry generally, people are really cool. Nobody wants to fight. Nobody wants to pay lawyers to do legal stuff. So if it's kind of intra industry, I'll just call and be like, hey, look, what's the problem? And if you think we're doing this, we'll cut production and we'll change the brand, things like that. It's when it's people outside the industry who are used to vigorously protecting their IP, that's when you get a little bit more of a kind of we'll sue your butt vibe. And then my job is to respond and say, actually, you don't have that great of a case. This is actually parody, and we'll fight about that later if you want. My clients are kind of like, I don't want to pay you to do that. And I don't blame them. So my approach is definitely very more, let's just be cautious.
Yeah. Now, if somebody doesn't want to be friendly and somebody is more combative, do you advise just getting off the phone and calling up the lawyers and handling it that way?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, once it becomes like, we're gonna sue you, or I'm gonna punch you in the face, or whatever you want to say. At that point, I'd probably hang up and say like, all right, let's just get legal involved then. If you want to be like that, then that's how we'll roll.
Yep.
But it's a risk, and it's money, and it's expensive.
Now, one of the things that I saw recently, and I don't know how familiar you are with this, but Brooklyn Brewery was actually sued for not having a handicap-accessible website.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something like I hadn't even considered, but it is a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are not, ADA compliant, you're at serious risk. So
That's right.
how many breweries do you think are susceptible to something like that? Because I would have never imagined that you needed to have a scrollable website for somebody who's blind.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's significant liability out there for folks who aren't adhering to ADA. I think my personal view is that ADA has been exploited to some degree by some folks, and some of them are trolling for lawsuits. And I once had a professor, I won't even say who he was, but he said, if you give me a box of documents, I'll find you a lawsuit. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. In California, we don't even have a rule that you have to say, are you 21 or older? Click yes. I mean, that's not even a rule. Most people do it as best practices. But I do think there's, for craft breweries, if you're going to open up in a certain place, or you're going to have a certain website and you're on a shoestring budget, the liability out there is real, and it's definitely a risk you're taking.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like there's so much that brewers need to pay attention to.
That's right.
Now, one of the things that El Segundo does is a product with Stone Cold, the wrestler, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
That's right.
Now, is that like a licensing arrangement? How have you guys structured that on the legal side?
That's a great question. And so without getting too into the weeds of client confidentiality, basically it's a licensing structure. Steve Austin's a big fan of the brewery. He's got a home in the South Bay by El Segundo. Would come by the brewery, he likes beer. And so what happened was he kind of wanted to get involved, and we brought him over, and he helped design the beer. And he did the hops and everything else. And they sold it as just a generic name, and it just went nuts in the taproom. People loved the beer itself, because we were concerned, or at least my brother was concerned, that people might see it as a gimmick, right? Like, oh, Steve Austin. But it turns out it was a really good beer. Steve loved it. And so we worked out a licensing agreement, and, that's kind of been history. It's been a big seller.
Yeah, I mean, that is probably one of the more popular brands that the brewery offers now.
Yeah, I think Mayberry's probably number one, Citrus maybe number two, but yeah, people really dig that Steve Austin beer. Yeah. It's got its own, non-beer kind of interest,
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, as a professor of lawyering skills,
Yeah.
what do you teach your class? Like, what's a lawyering skill? I only have time to learn one lawyering skill. What are you going to teach me?
If you only had time to do one, it would probably be the Tide House laws.
Okay.
So as a brewery, you need to be aware of what you can and can't do as a legal matter in terms of pay to play, and what you can give a retailer, what you can't give a retailer, what constitutes free advertising. It's super restrictive in what you can and can't do, and a lot of breweries aren't aware of that.
And it's changing right now as we speak. I mean, there's a bill on the governor's desk that will enable breweries to give, will enable retailers to accept up to 5 cases of glassware, I believe.
Yeah, and the good news is, and I'll give a shout out to my student, Katie Green. She works somewhere in the government area. He didn't sign it yesterday.
Okay.
So that bill is now dead. But the concept was a manufacturer could give up to, at first it was 10, and then it was 5 free cases of glassware. And that's fine for really large breweries. It's not good for small craft breweries.
So you're saying that bill's dead, because we talked to Tom McCormick yesterday, and he said that I guess he's got till the end of the month to sign it.
Yeah, it's funny. I ran into Tom yesterday. I was like, hey, that bill didn't get signed. And he said, are you kidding me? Like, you're the first person who's told me that. So, yeah, my student emailed me and said, literally, Jerry is a homie, which I thought was funny. And, he didn't sign it, so it's rejected. It's essentially vetoed. So that bill's dead.
Wow.
Yeah.
A little bit of breaking news here. Who would have thunk?
Yeah.
So now, do you think that that's a positive thing for craft brewers? Because, I mean, they really, it seems like the CCBA worked to get it to a point where it was somewhat agreeable for craft brewers. And I don't know, I would imagine that there are some small companies that would actually like the opportunity to give away some glassware.
Yeah, I respect that opinion. I can't speak for Tom or the CCBA, but my view is that every client I've had or every craft brewery I know, if you think about, if you can give free stuff to a retailer, 10 cases of glassware, 5 cases of glassware, how expensive is that per retailer, per retail account? And there are certainly some global brands that can totally afford that and would love to do it. But even guys like El Segundo Brewing Company, who's doing like 5,500 barrels, they can't afford to keep up with that.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's a little bit of an element of pay to play in there, and I didn't like it. I thought it was a bad idea. I know there were some craft breweries who were okay with it. But the more exceptions we make to Tide House, where you cannot give anything of value, the more it whittles down the law. And I think that's really bad for craft beer.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit of breaking news here. The glassware bill in California is dead.
Right. Well, according to yesterday, yes.
Thank you so much, Dan, for
Thank you for your
sharing that
time.
with us, and thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it.
And yeah, if you have that Stone Cold beer floating around somewhere, I'll
might.
take one, and
I got you.
I might even let you drop a stunner on me later.
Fair enough.
All right, Dan, a professor of lawyering skills from the University of Pacific and general counsel to El Segundo. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.